Hey everybody, welcome. So this is lesson 3 of building our own ChatGPT front end in Angular. So up until now, what we've done is I gave you a brief introduction to what is Angular. We've installed the Angular prerequisites, so we should have Visual Studio Code, Node.js, and NPM installed, and we installed the Angular CLI. So what we're going to do now is we are going to get started creating our first application, the old Hello World application that everybody needs to do as the first thing in any new language. So I am over here in Visual Studio Code, and I've still got the terminal up from the last thing we did, which was installing the Angular CLI. So if I was starting from scratch, I would open up a new terminal, and then the command to create a new Angular project is ng space new. So what we're going to do is we're going to say ng space new, and now we want the name of our new application. So we're going to say lesson 1 dash hello is going to be what we're going to create. So we say ng new. Actually, this is lesson 3. Lesson 3 dash hello. So the first thing it's going to ask me is, would you like to add Angular routing? And its default is N. The answer to this question is always yes, unless you are creating a single page app. So unless you're just doing a landing page, you're going to be using Angular routing. So I'm going to say yes here. Then the next thing it's going to ask is, what style sheet format would you like to use? And we are just going to say CSS. And now what it is doing, it is installing all the packages that we need in order to have our base Angular application. So this takes a couple of seconds. A lot of times you almost never, or I'll say I almost never start with an ng new. I have got a basic framework of an application that I use, and that is the place I start. And so that will be on our GitHub, on the Kinetic Seas GitHub. Once we get a few steps in, we'll have a good starting place, and then I will show you how to start from that spot going forward. All right, so we have created an application called Lesson 3 Hello, and we've successfully initialized Git. So now what I want to do is I want to go open that folder. So I'm going to go up to File, Open Folder, and then today we created this Lesson 3 Hello, so I'm going to open it. And so now we are actually editing the Lesson 3 Hello application. So let me start now by bringing up a new terminal, because we're going to need it. But before we get too far into this, let's look at the structure of an Angular application, because this is where people either love or hate Angular, the fact that it is so structured. So our directory is called Lesson 3 Hello. That's the name of our application. So under there, we have a source directory where we spend most of our time working. But now at this highest level, we have a couple of important files. Angular JSON, I'll open that up. Angular JSON is the configuration file for this project. There are a couple of things that we are going to change eventually. One is we go down to this build section, and anything that is included by default, you can add here, and it'll actually get compiled into the application. So angular.json, this is all I'm going to do right now is just talk about the fact that that is a configuration file for the project you're working on. Package.json, if you're familiar with Node Package Management and NPM, these are all the dependencies of everything that is needed to compile and run the application. So we have our dependencies right now are Angular animations, common, compiler, core, forms, platform browser, and router. Okay, so package.json, anytime we do an npm install, it's going to get added to package.json. Our third important file is TypeScript config. This is what version of TypeScript we're using. So I just use the default that it comes with, which in this case is ES 2022. So this is everything at the highest level, which is the angular.json, the package.json, and the tsconfig.json. Now, under the source directory, this is where we do the majority of our work. Now, every Angular application has a single index.html. And if we look at index.html, it's not much of anything. It's got a title, and it's got a body that says app root. So the way dependency injection works is the entire application is going to be inserted between this app root and the /app root. So the entire application goes there. So you very rarely make too many changes to the index.html. Now, the next thing we need to look at is everything that is in the assets directory. Now, the assets directory is where you put all of your images, all of the files that you include, if you got custom style sheets or JavaScript that you want to include. Pretty much everything goes under the assets file. Now, the assets directory is included as part of the deploy, but what it's basically going to do is just everything that's in the assets directory is just going to get copied out. So any images you're using, you've got media files, anything that you want to use that your application needs access to, you're going to put it in this assets folder. Now, we do most of our work in the app folder. So when we first created this application, we said that we're using the route provider, so we're using routing. So that's where app routing module that comes in. Beyond that, every component in Angular has 4 different files to it. So when we first start our application, we have just the app component. So it's got an HTML file, which is called the template. It's got a CSS file for any custom styles that relate to just this component. It's got a TS file, this app component.ts, that's where your TypeScript code goes. And then it's got this app component spec.ts that is for testing. So the 3 that you need to worry about is the template file, which is the HTML, the CSS file, which is any custom styles, and then the TS folder. So now at this point, we have a bunch of stuff that is actually in the HTML file. We've got some stuff that is in the component file, and we have nothing in the CSS file. So at this highest level, at the app level, we have just the app component. And then we have this thing called app module.ts. And this is where we import components into that have a global scope. So if we import a component into here, all of our other components are going to have access to whatever we import. We're not going to do that yet. So now at this point, what we've done is all we did is do an ng new, and we created a default program. So what I want to do now, though, is I want to run it. So I want to see what it looks like. So if I type in ng space serve, it is going to first compile it or transpile it. So it's taking the TypeScript code and turning that into JavaScript. And now it's created some files. And so as soon as these files are created, we get a thing where it says Angular Live Development Server is listening on localhost 4200. So if I go back over to my browser, I can open up localhost and then 4200. And this is serving my Hello World Angular app. Now, if you remember from the other lesson where we were talking about fast API and in Python, that is listening on localhost 8000. So that's why I use PyCharm as my other editor, so I could have my Python up and running in one editor, and I can have my Angular up and running in another. So localhost, in this case, what's going to happen is we are going to go to localhost 8000 to get the data that we're running in localhost 4200. So now let me go back to my Visual Studio Code. And we're going to go into this app component.html, and I'm going to get rid of everything. I'm going to get rid of almost everything. So the only thing that I am not getting rid of is router outlet. And router outlet is where anything that comes from the route provider gets injected. So if we go back and we look at index.html, we had app root, okay? So app root has app component goes here. So in this case, it would be app component goes here. And then inside of app component, we have router outlet, and route provider goes here. So anytime we are going to a new URL, that is going to get inserted into this router outlet section. Now, since we haven't created any more components yet, we're just going to put our hello world from app component okay, and then we're going to go over here to the index, and we're going to say hello world from index.html. So when I go back and I do a save all, it's going to recompile. And now when I go back to my browser, you see I got hello world from index.html and hello world from app component.html. So what has happened inside of our Angular application is it works from the outside in. So index.html says hello world from index.html, and then it is injecting app component.html in this section right here. So this is our hello world application. This is what gets us started. So now that we've gotten started, we're going to go to talking about services, because the whole idea of this application is being able to talk to ChatGPT. So I don't want to go too deep into just the basics of Angular until I at least demo how this whole project is going to work together. So in the next lesson, we're going to start up our Python application, and we're going to do what we need to do to have our Angular application talk to our Python Fast API application.